The termination letter was still warm from the printer when Marcus Whitfield's hands began to shake, because 17 years of loyalty had just been reduced to a single paragraph and a cardboard box waiting by the door. He stood frozen in the glass-walled office he had built his entire adult life around, staring at the words. Position eliminated effective immediately. While outside the window the Chicago skyline blurred through the tears he refused to let fall in front of his boss. Marcus was 44 years old, a widower raising his 8-year-old daughter Grace alone since cancer had taken his wife 3 years earlier, and in that moment, everything he had sacrificed for her future seemed to be collapsing into nothing. If you believe in second chances, in quiet strength, and in the idea that good people eventually rise again, take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to this channel, because stories like Marcus's deserve to be seen and remembered. Marcus had joined Holbrook Manufacturing as a 27-year-old floor supervisor with nothing but a work ethic passed down from his father, and a desperate need to prove himself. Over the years he climbed steadily, not through politics or favors, but through the kind of relentless competence that made machines run smoother and deadlines get met. He became operations director, the man employees trusted when shipments were late, when equipment failed, when the whole plant felt like it was falling apart at 2 a.m. He was the one who answered the phone. He was the one who showed up. But 6 weeks earlier, old Mr. Holbrook, the founder who had built the company from a single rented warehouse, had suffered a stroke and stepped back from daily operations, leaving control in the hands of his son, Bradley Holbrook Jr., a 31-year-old who had spent most of his adult life failing upward through his father's connections rather than his own effort. Bradley didn't want operations directors who challenged him with facts and spreadsheets. He wanted comfort, flattery, and control, and Marcus, with his blunt honesty and his refusal to sign off on corner-cutting decisions, had become an obstacle. So Bradley did what small men do when threatened by competent ones. He manufactured a reason, whispered doubts into the ears of the board, and had Marcus quietly walked out of the building he had helped keep alive for nearly 2 decades. In his place, Bradley installed his college roommate, a smooth-talking 28-year-old named Tyler Ashcombe, whose only qualification was that he had once interned in a marketing department and knew how to wear a suit well in meetings. That night, Marcus sat in his small rented house in the suburbs, staring at Grace's crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, wondering how he would explain to his little girl that the man who was supposed to protect her from the world had just lost the only thing keeping their lives stable. Grace, sensing something was wrong the way children always do, crawled into his lap and asked if he was sad, and Marcus, throat tight with a grief he could barely name, simply held her and whispered that everything was going to be okay, even though he had never felt less certain of anything in his life. The weeks that followed were brutal. Marcus sent out resumes by the dozens, sat through interviews where his experience was praised but somehow never enough, and watched his savings dwindle while trying to shield Grace from the fear eating him alive. He took a temporary job stocking shelves at a hardware store on weekends just to keep food on the table, swallowing his pride every single shift, telling himself it was temporary, that dignity mattered less than his daughter's next meal. Meanwhile, back at Holbrook Manufacturing, the cracks Marcus had spent years quietly patching began splitting wide open. Tyler Ashcombe didn't understand the supply chains Marcus had memorized, didn't know which machines needed babying and which vendors needed pressure, didn't have the relationships built on years of trust with the floor workers who actually kept production running. Bradley, more interested in redesigning the executive lounge than reading operational reports, ignored the warning signs. Within 2 weeks, a critical shipment to their largest client was delayed because nobody had caught a maintenance issue Marcus would have flagged instantly. Within 3 weeks, 2 of the most experienced floor managers quit, unwilling to work under leadership that didn't know their names, let alone their expertise. By the start of the 4th week, a fire suppression system malfunction, the kind of detail Marcus inspected personally every single quarter, went unnoticed until it caused 6 figures in water damage to inventory. The board began asking questions. Old Mr. Holbrook, recovering slowly but sharp-minded as ever, started receiving phone calls from panicked executives and furious clients, and when he asked what had changed, the answer kept circling back to one name: Marcus Whitfield was gone. It was on a rainy Tuesday evening, while Marcus was helping Grace with her math homework at their kitchen table, that his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was frail but unmistakably determined, introducing itself as Walter Holbrook himself, calling not from the office but from his home, where he had spent the last 3 days quietly reviewing every report his son had been too careless to read. Walter didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told Marcus that he knew the truth, that Bradley's insecurity had cost the company its steadiest hand, and that the losses of the past month were entirely preventable had Marcus still been at the helm. Marcus listened in stunned silence as Walter admitted, in a voice heavy with something close to shame, that loyalty and competence had been sacrificed for comfort, and that it was the biggest mistake the company had made in its 40-year history. Then Walter asked the question Marcus had stopped allowing himself to hope for: would he come back, not just to his old position, but as Chief Operations Officer, with full authority and a seat on the board, so that no future Bradley could ever undermine him again? Marcus sat there holding the phone, looking across the table at Grace, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes, sensing that something important was happening. He thought about every shift at the hardware store, every rejection email. Every night he lay awake wondering if he'd failed her, and he felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in weeks. He said yes quietly, his voice cracking just slightly, and Grace, not fully understanding but recognizing hope on her father's face, threw her arms around his neck and asked if this meant good things were coming, and Marcus, holding his daughter close, told her that yes, sweetheart, good things were finally coming. Marcus returned to Holbrook Manufacturing 3 days later, not as a man begging for his job back, but as a man being welcomed home by workers who had missed him, by clients who trusted his word, and by a founder who publicly apologized in front of the entire staff for the mistake his family had made. Bradley, humiliated and stripped of his authority, was quietly moved to a junior role far from decision-making, while Tyler Ashcombe was let go within the week. Under Marcus's steady leadership, the company stabilized within 2 months. The client relationships were repaired, and the workers who had stayed loyal through the chaos were rewarded with the kind of respect they had always deserved. If this story touched something in you, if you believe that good people who work quietly and honestly deserve to be seen and valued, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hard times don't last forever. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something important. Comment below with just one word describing how this story made you feel, because I read every single comment, and I want to know that Marcus and Grace's story reached your heart. Marcus never forgot what it felt like to be discarded, and he made sure that under his leadership, no hardworking employee at Holbrook Manufacturing would ever feel invisible again. Every evening, he still came home to Grace, who now proudly told her classmates that her father ran an entire company, and every night, tucking her into bed, Marcus whispered a quiet thank you to whatever force in the universe had given him back the life he thought he'd lost, because sometimes the lowest moments are simply the universe making room for something far better to arrive.